900 years before the United States existed, before Columbus, before the Magna Carta was signed in England, people were already living in a village perched on a mesa in northern Arizona. They are still living there today. Same families, same land, some of the same stone. Stay with me until the end, because that town isn't a ruin. It isn't abandoned. And it might be the oldest continuously lived in place in the entire country, older than anything else on this list by nearly 700 years. That's where we're headed. But to get there, we're going to walk through 9 other Arizona towns that refused to die. Gold camps that should have been swallowed by the desert. A Spanish fort raided by Apache war parties. A mining town that quite literally slid down a mountain, and a river crossing that outlasted floods, empires, and its own name changes. Arizona is one of the youngest states in the country, the 48th to join the Union, but its towns tell a much older story than its statehood does. Some were built by empires holding a frontier. Some were built by one man with a shovel and a rumor of gold. And one was built by people who never needed an empire's permission to begin with. These are the 10 oldest towns in Arizona still standing, still occupied, and still telling their story to anyone willing to listen. If you're new here, consider sticking around and subscribing, because we cover forgotten American places like this every week, and I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight, so drop it in the comments before we start the countdown. Let's begin at number 10. Number 10 is Bisbee, tucked into the Mule Mountains of southeastern Arizona, just a few miles from the Mexican border. Bisbee's story starts in 1877, when a U.S. Army scouting party out of Fort Bowie stumbled onto mineral-rich rock in a gulch the miners simply called Mule Gulch. Word spread fast, prospectors poured in, and by August of 1880, the Copper Queen mine was capitalized for $2.5 million. That same year, the camp was renamed Bisbee, in honor of Judge DeWitt Bisbee, a San Francisco attorney who had helped bankroll the Copper Queen. Here's the strange part. Judge Bisbee never once set foot in the town that carries his name. He financed a city, gave it his identity, and never saw it with his own eyes. Bisbee grew explosively once electrification swept the country and copper became the metal every city in America needed. At its peak, it was the largest city between St. Louis and San Francisco, pulling out more than 8 billion pounds of copper, over 100 million ounces of silver, and nearly 3 million ounces of gold before the mines finally went quiet. The boom pulled in so many workers that entire neighborhoods sprang up almost overnight. Warren, Lowell, San Jose, and by 1910, more than 25,000 people called the area home, making it the largest city in the Arizona Territory. Today, Bisbee survives as an artist colony built directly on top of one of the richest mineral deposits on the planet. Its streets stacked up the canyon walls in narrow staircases that still follow the old mining paths. It held on. But less than 30 miles away, a town with an even more famous origin story was rising out of pure silver and pure danger. That brings us to number 9, Tombstone. In 1877, a prospector and former Indian scout named Ed Schieffelin set out alone into hostile Apache territory southeast of Tucson, searching for ore. His friends warned him he was walking into his own grave. One of them, a fellow scout, reportedly told him the only rock he'd find out there would be his own tombstone. Schieffelin didn't listen. He found silver, a massive vein of it, and when he staked his claim, he named it exactly what he'd been warned about: Tombstone. The town he founded in 1879 grew at a pace that's almost hard to believe. Within 2 years, it had 2 banks, a school, 4 churches, bowling alleys, gambling halls, dance halls, and brothels. Its population rocketed from around 100 people to 14,000 in just 7 years. Tombstone was officially incorporated in 1881, the same year its streets became the stage for the most famous 30 seconds in Wild West history, the gunfight near the OK Corral, fought out on October 26, 1881 between the Earp brothers Doc Holliday and a group of cattle rustlers known as the Cowboys. The silver ran out eventually. The town did not. Tombstone earned the nickname the town too tough to die, and it lives up to it to this day with its original birdcage theater, its Boot Hill graveyard, and its wooden boardwalk still drawing visitors who want to stand exactly where that legend was written. Up in the mountains north of Tombstone, another mining town was about to be born, one that would eventually try to slide right off the hillside it was built on. Number 8 is Jerome. In 1876, prospectors staked the first mining claims on a steep, cone-shaped rise called Cleopatra Hill, high in Arizona's Black Hills. What they found was copper and lots of it. The claims were eventually bought up and consolidated into the United Verde Copper Company, financed in large part by a New York lawyer named Eugene Jerome, who gave the growing camp his name even though, much like Judge Bisbee down south, he apparently never visited the town either. Jerome wasn't officially incorporated until 1908, but by the 1920s its population had swelled to roughly 15,000 people, making it one of the largest towns in the entire Arizona territory, complete with opulent theaters, hotels, and a red light district that earned it the nickname the wickedest town in the West. But Jerome's greatest danger wasn't outlaws, it was the ground itself. Decades of aggressive mining and underground blasting destabilized the mountainside beneath the town. In 1938, a massive dynamite blast at a mine known as the Black Pit triggered a slow-motion catastrophe. Buildings began sliding downhill. The town jail was literally jolted off its foundation and slid 225 feet down the slope. It still sits there today, exactly where it stopped, tilted and cracked. A jail that moved without anyone breaking out of it. That wasn't Jerome's first brush with disaster underground. Back in 1905, floodwaters seeping into burning sections of the United Verde mine triggered a violent steam explosion, killing or badly injuring a dozen miners waiting near the surface for a shift change. The fires beneath Jerome smoldered for years, eventually forcing the mines to abandon underground tunnels for open pit operations. When the mines finally shut down for good in 1953, Jerome's population collapsed to around 50 residents almost overnight, and it teetered on the edge of becoming a true ghost town. It didn't disappear. Artists moved in during the 1960s and 70s, and today Jerome survives, perched on its unstable hill, a town that quite literally would not stay still. From a mining camp balanced on a mountain, we head south to a town that started with farmland instead of Ur. Number 7 is Florence in Pinal County. Florence was settled in 1866 by Levi Ruggles, a Civil War veteran who saw agricultural promise in the land along the Gila River, and it grew steadily as a center of farming, ranching, and eventually mining once the nearby Silver King mine was discovered in 1875. The town held its first elections in 1871 and was formally incorporated in 1881. Unlike the boom-and-bust mining camps we've talked about so far, Florence became something quieter and more permanent, a hub of law, government, and commerce for the Arizona territory. Its downtown today holds more than 25 buildings listed on the National Register of Historic Places, an extraordinary concentration for a town this size. McFarland State Historic Park preserves Arizona's first territorial courthouse and jail, giving visitors a direct look at what frontier justice actually looked like. Florence also became an unlikely home to Hollywood when silent film star Tom Mix settled there in the 1920s, drawn by the same dry desert light that had once drawn ranchers and farmers a half-century earlier. The Pinal County Historical Museum, housed in a former courthouse, displays artifacts tracing the region's story from its Native American roots through its mining and ranching years, and every February the town celebrates that heritage with its Junior Parada Festival. Florence never had a single dramatic boom or a single dramatic bust. It simply endured, one harvest and one election at a time, while it quietly became one of the oldest continuously governed towns in the state. Just to the north, in the granite hills of central Arizona, a different kind of town was about to be handed the entire weight of a brand new territorial government. That's number 6, Prescott. In 1864, the newly appointed territorial governor, John Goodwin, chose this site in the mountains as the very first capital of Arizona Territory. He named it Prescott, in honor of the American historian William H. Prescott. For a young frontier outpost, that was an enormous responsibility. Prescott wasn't just a town, it was the seat of government for the entire territory. That status didn't last, though, in 1867. Just 3 years after Prescott became the capital, the territorial government packed up and moved the capital to Tucson instead, stripping Prescott of the title that had defined its earliest identity. Most frontier towns built entirely around a single institution collapse when that institution leaves. Prescott didn't. It reinvented itself as a commercial and social hub for the surrounding mining and ranching country, anchored by its famous Whiskey Row, a strip of saloons and storefronts that became legendary throughout the territory. Today, those same buildings house restaurants, bars, and boutiques, and the town square still fills with festivals almost every weekend of the year. Prescott lost its capital status less than a decade after founding and simply outlived every town that briefly held power over it. West of Prescott, another town was rising for a very different reason: one man's discovery of gold in a desert riverbed. Number 5 is Wickenburg. In 1863, a German immigrant named Henry Wickenburg struck gold near the Hassayampa River, and the town that grew up around his discovery took his name. The Vulture Mine, opened later that same year, became one of the richest gold producers in Arizona history, pulling out more than 340,000 ounces of gold and 260,000 ounces of silver over its decades of operation. A satellite settlement sprang up right next to the mine itself, called Vulture City, and unlike Wickenburg, Vulture City did not survive. It's a true ghost town today, its buildings abandoned to the desert wind. Wickenburg, sitting a safer distance away along the river, kept growing even as its namesake mine eventually played out. By the 1930s, the town had found a second life entirely. City dwellers from the east began arriving by train to spend a week playing cowboy on working ranches nearby, and Wickenburg reinvented itself as what's still known today as the Dude Ranch capital of the world. It's a rare case in Arizona history, a gold town that outlived its own gold. From a river that gave one town its wealth, we now travel to a river crossing so important that people had been fighting over control of it for more than 300 years before the town beside it even had a permanent name. We're now halfway through the countdown, so if this kind of forgotten American history is your thing, take a second and hit subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel keep finding places like these. Now, back to the list. Number 4 is Yuma. The crossing point on the Colorado River near modern Yuma has been strategically important since at least 1540, when Spanish explorers under Hernando de Alarcón, traveling with the Francisco Vázquez de Coronado expedition, navigated up the river and encountered thriving communities already living along its banks. But a permanent American town wouldn't take root there for another 3 centuries. In 1854, 2 surveyors named Charles Poston and Herman Ehrenberg laid out a town site they called Colorado City. It nearly ended before it began a massive flood in 1862, all but wiped Colorado City off the map, along with a neighboring settlement. The survivors rebuilt and merged, renaming their town Arizona City. It was formally incorporated under that name in 1871. Then, in 1873, the territorial legislature renamed it one final time, Yuma, likely derived from a word used by the local Quechan people connected to the smoke signals they used to summon rain. The U.S. Army had already recognized the site's importance decades earlier, establishing Fort Yuma on the California side of the river in 1852 to guard the crossing. Once the Gadsden Purchase brought the southern strip of Arizona into the United States in 1854, steamboats began running regular routes up the Colorado from the Gulf of California, a supply line that stayed active for over 60 years. In 1876, the notorious Yuma Territorial Prison opened on a hill overlooking the town, and the railroad followed the next year, cementing Yuma's role as a gateway between California and the rest of the Southwest. 3 names, 1 flood, and over 3 centuries of history at a single river crossing, and Yuma still sits exactly where all of it happened. From a river crossing fought over by empires, we move to the Presidio where one of those empires actually planted its flag. Number 3 is Tucson. On August 20th, 1775, a Spanish army officer of Irish descent named Hugh O'Connor selected a defensible terrace above the Santa Cruz River as the site for a new military fort, the Presidio San Agustin del Tucson. The location sat right beside an existing O'odham village known as Cook, on a name that over time became Tucson. Construction began soon after, and by late 1776, soldiers and their families had relocated north from an older Presidio to occupy the new fort. Right around the same time, colonists were declaring independence 3,000 miles away on the other coast. Life at the Tucson Presidio was not peaceful. The fort endured repeated Apache assaults, and after a particularly severe attack in 1782, the garrison built an adobe wall standing 8 to 12 feet high and stretching 700 feet on each side, transforming the outpost into one of the largest fortified presidios on the northern frontier of New Spain. The Presidio remained in continuous military use for over a century, changing hands from Spain to Mexico and finally to the United States, until American forces arrived in March of 1856 and the old walls were gradually dismantled. The Tohono O'odham people had already been farming that same river valley for thousands of years before the Spanish arrived, and nearby, the Mission San Xavier del Bac, built by Spanish missionaries in the late 1600s, is still standing and still an active church today. Tucson's founding is celebrated every year at La Fiesta de San Agustin, named for the same saint as the original Presidio. Tucson grew far beyond its military origins to become Arizona's second largest city, and it still carries the nickname born from that original fort, the Old Pueblo. Nearby, the Presidio's founders had good reason to trust the location because 30 miles south, an earlier Spanish outpost had already been standing guard for more than 20 years. That's number 2, Tubac. In 1752, following a violent uprising by the Pima people the year before, Spanish colonial authorities established the Royal Presidio of San Ignacio de Tubac along the Santa Cruz River. It holds a title no other town in this state can claim. Tubac is the oldest European settlement in what is now Arizona, predating the Tucson Presidio by more than 2 decades. Tubac soldiers were encouraged to bring their families to live at the fort, which is part of what made it a genuine settlement rather than just a military camp. In 1775, the same year Tucson's Presidio was founded, Tubac's most famous resident, Captain Juan Bautista de Anza, led an expedition of 240 colonists out from this exact spot, on a journey that would end more than 1,000 miles away with the founding of the city of San Francisco. But Tubac's own fortunes were far shakier than the city it helped create. In 1848, most of its residents abandoned the settlement to chase gold rumors in California, leaving it nearly empty. Then, in 1861, a brutal Apache raid drove out the town's population once again. Twice left for dead, Tubac kept being reoccupied first by miners in the 1850s, later by an art colony that took root in the 1940s and formally organized in 1948. Long before any of that, the site had already been home to Hohokam and O'odham villages for centuries, and in 1859 Tubac added another first to its record, publishing the Weekly Arizonian, the first newspaper ever printed in Arizona. In 1959, the ruins of the original 1752 Presidio became Arizona's very first state park. Tubac earned its title as the birthplace of European Arizona the hard way, surviving 2 near-total abandonments to still be standing today. But even Tubac's 2.5 centuries look brief compared to what's waiting for us at number 1, a village that was already 800 years old when Tubac's first Spanish soldier arrived. Number 1 is Old Oraibi, a Hopi village resting on the edge of Third Mesa in northeastern Arizona, at an elevation of nearly 6,500 feet. According to multiple historical and archaeological sources, Oraibi was established sometime before the year 1100 AD. That means this village was already standing for roughly 200 years before Genghis Khan was born, and for well over 600 years before the first English colonists ever reached Jamestown. Along with Acoma Pueblo in neighboring New Mexico, Old Oraibi is widely regarded by historians and archaeologists as one of the 2 oldest continuously inhabited settlements anywhere in the United States. Its people are believed to have consolidated here during a series of severe droughts in the 13th century, when several smaller Hopi villages in the region were abandoned and their residents gathered into a handful of stronger settlements, Oraibi among them. The outside world didn't reach Oraibi until 1540, when a small detachment from the Coronado expedition, led by Pedro de Tovar, became the first Europeans to make contact with the Hopi. Nearly a century later, in 1629, Spanish missionaries built the San Francisco mission directly within the village, an attempt to convert the Hopi to Christianity. It didn't take permanent hold. In 1680, during the sweeping Pueblo revolt against Spanish rule, the mission at Oraibi was destroyed, and the Hopi preserved their independence and their traditions in a way few other indigenous communities in the Southwest were able to. For centuries after that, Oraibi continued as one of the most influential Hopi villages, and by 1890 records show its population at around 905 people, roughly half of every Hopi living across all the Mesa villages combined at that time. The community faced its own internal turning point in 1906, when a deep disagreement over how much to embrace outside influence, including Western schooling and Christianity, led to a peaceful but permanent split. One group moved to the base of the mesa and founded a new settlement, now known as Kikotsmovi, while those who wished to preserve traditional Hopi life remained at Oraibi itself. Through it all, the people of Oraibi sustained themselves with dry farming, growing corn and beans in the open desert without irrigation, a technique passed down for generations and still practiced on the mesa today. In 1964, the village was formally designated a National Historic Landmark, a recognition of just how singular its history really is. It's important to say clearly, Old Oraibi is not a ruin, And it is not a museum. It is a living Hopi community today, with residents who ask visitors to respect their privacy and refrain from photographing the village or its people. That request deserves the same respect as the history itself. Nearly 1,000 years after it was founded, while Roman ruins were already ancient. While European kingdoms were rising and falling, this small village on a windswept mesa in Arizona has simply continued one of the longest unbroken threads of continuous human life anywhere on this continent, and quite possibly the oldest town in any American state that you'll ever see for yourself. 10 towns, 3 empires, and one village that outlasted almost all of recorded American history without ever leaving the mesa it was built on. From gold camps that reinvented themselves, to a jail that slid down a mountain and stayed standing, to a presidio that helped found San Francisco, Arizona's oldest towns share one thing in common. None of them went quietly, and none of them are done yet. If you want more forgotten and overlooked corners of American history like this, subscribe and let me know in the comments which of these 10 surprised you the most. I read every one. I'll see you in the next video.